address energy poverty and its linkages to the other Millennium Development Goals. So what do we need to do? It is clear, we need clear, for every country, we need energy plans. We're not talking about pilot projects now. You don't need an energy strategy over 10, 20 years to do a pilot project. But we're beyond pilots. We need to scale up, we need to move fast. The emissions are great. So for that speed, you need to bring in the private sector without a plan. They will not come. Energy investments are big, they're costly. Private sector needs confidence that there is a strategy over 10, 20 years, because these investments are supposed to last 50 or more years. So you need a plan in a country. You need stable, predictable policies, because these are long-term investments. We also need to do renewable resource mapping. We're trying to sell clean energy to countries. Some don't even know what the concrete potential is that they have. How much solar radiation? What is the wind map? Some countries don't have as yet. We need those elements if, in fact, we're really going to have a scaled-up deployment of clean technology. Of course, the money issue is important. You need good financing. Which countries is this working? As we speak, South Africa is making a big statement here. It is not in the negotiating room, but it's right outside. They're launching SARI, the South African Renewable Energy Initiative. Clear plan, clear map. Just a few weeks ago, they launched a request for proposals for 3,750 megawatts for clean energy. That's real. That's not imagined. And there's innovative financing, using donor money to de-risk private capital that they need. Morocco, brilliant example, almost approaching 100% energy access, but at the same time, they're planning to sell energy to Europe using clean technologies. The Desertec initiative is real. You have leading companies in Germany, Siemens, leading financial institutions, KfW, Munich Re, all part of it. Brazil, the new president has her initiative, Electricity for All. Because for her, before becoming president, she was leading the social programs to reduce poverty. She knows, as a former energy minister, without access to energy, people remain poor. They cannot produce, they cannot store food, they cannot pump water, and it's mainly the women who suffer. Finally, the same comment that Corrado made about China. Thanks to China, the cost of solar panels have dropped 30, 40% in 5 years. Thanks to China, we see ambitious investment programs in China for clean energy in their 12 five-year development plan.
A lot of lessons that people had learned and applied before modern technology have in fact the solutions to some of the most profound problems that we have created for ourselves. And so the whole notion of using human waste to replenish through biogas, through nutrients, and through all of the things that we thought we could simply flush away with clean drinking water, and it would cease to be a problem anymore, created a new set of problems that we're having to resolve. And I was particularly impressed by Jason's insight that having leapfrogged the era of the landline in telecommunications to mobile technology and everything that means for interaction and communication, so Africa might well leapfrog the Industrial Revolution with all of the devastation that it brought in so many ways into the Sustainability Revolution. I thought that was a very interesting concept, because Africa has leapfrogged the era of landline communication. It never came to sub-Saharan Africa in any extensive way. And today, out of Africa, especially places like Kenya and Uganda, are coming the most extraordinary applications for education, for healthcare, and a range of other government functions that are based on mobile because the alternative is not there. And in countries where the alternative is there, often that migration to the extraordinary potential of mobile has been much slower. And equally, I think Africa will show the world that it is an entirely false dichotomy to say you can only either go for green or go for growth. It's an entirely false dichotomy to say the choice is green or growth. If you're stuck in the ways of the past, that may be a choice if you see the trajectory as a continuation of industrialization of the past. If you make the mind shift that we have to make, green becomes growth. And that is why we talk about the green economy. And that is why we talk about building a manufacturing sector based on the green economy and the needs of the future. And so I was particularly interested in that theme and spent a little bit of time last night reading the wonderful books and literature we had. I also wanted to pick up the theme that Belinda Walker raised on what do cities do. Now, it's absolutely true that in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, cities provide all of the basic things that human beings cannot be expected to provide for themselves, like electricity reticulation systems, like water purification systems, like sewerage systems, like road networks and public transport. And where that stops and the responsibility of individuals begins is a major question. Is it the role of a government to provide everyone with a toilet? Is it the role of a government to provide everybody with a geyser? These are major questions that need to arise because one has to talk about the alternative pressures on a budget and what the role of the government is and what the role of individuals and individual families and communities may be. But leaving that aside, I understand the core role of cities to be to link individuals with the national economy and to link the national economy with the global economy. And therefore cities and provinces and regions, but cities are much more important than provinces. Cities who understand the role of green and the compatibility between green and economic growth and don't see it as a contradiction are going to play a leading role in ensuring that citizens make the crucial choices that we need to make to reduce our carbon footprint at the same time as finding ways in which and pioneering ways in which to grow the economy through green investments. And I'm delighted to say that Cape Town has visionary political leaders and visionary officials who understand precisely what we're talking about when we talk about the green economy, and they understand how to make green integral to growth. Because our number one priority in this province and in South Africa has to be growth and jobs. I was fascinated to read on page 6 of the Cape Times that wind is now the cheapest form of electricity generation, with an average price of 89 cents a kilowatt hour compared to 97 cents per kilowatt hour for Eskom's new coal-fired power stations. And this comes from Mr. Roger Price, who is the Chief Executive Officer of WindLab, an international wind energy company that is investing in wind energy in South Africa. And he says it's a false comparison to compare the cost of generating wind energy with the old coal-fired power plants because their capital costs have been paid off. He said what you need to do is add the new ones, like Medupi and Kusile, and then average that out and see just how expensive it is. And in the context of Eskom's recent announcement that they're going to increase the price of electricity 16% per year, I think it was for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, I didn't want to say make things sound worse than they actually are. This particular gentleman, Mr. Price, who has a very fortuitous name, Mr. Price said the cost of wind energy is far more competitive and increasingly becoming so. And he says it won't be long before we can have wind as a base load. Then he attacks this myth that I've also heard often before, that you can't use wind as a base load for electricity because wind blows erratically. Today you would think that the wind never blows in Cape Town. Yesterday you could hardly stand on your feet outside. And we do know about erratic wind, but he says that's not a problem because the wind is always blowing somewhere in South Africa. The wind is always blowing somewhere in South Africa. And he says when you look at a wind map and you see the strategic locations of all the places that wind is blowing, you will see that there is never a time when wind isn't blowing somewhere. And he believes that it is enough wind to provide and to sustain 25% of the grid's capacity without any strain. So he says it's a complete myth to believe that wind can't be used as a baseload. We all know about our glorious sunshine, and I was amazed when I was in Germany recently. They think they've got wind, and then you try not to laugh or look patronizing. It's a tiny little breeze that lets the leaves rustle now and again. And they also think that they've got sun, and you say yes when it's not entirely overcast. But they've done amazing things with harnessing that really minute amount of natural energy. I went to a little village called Feldheim. Now it is a small village, but they've taken themselves entirely off the electricity grid. The entire base load of that town is powered by wind turbines and by solar energy, of which they have a huge lot less than we do in any of those areas. So I thought this was a fascinating article. And I think much sooner than any of us expect, we will find that green energies are highly competitive. And that is why we have to make sure that they can compete from here. And that is why the role of Cape Town is to ensure that we are ready, preemptively ready for that. And that is why Cape Town is looking at a green hub and a green industrial hub around the entire area of Atlantis, running up in the new industrial development zone around Saldanha, so that we can be at the forefront of manufacturing the technology required to harvest green energy sources and in generating them and in reticulating them. And Alderman Walker has a very crucial role to play in that, because Alderman Walker is the MACO member for economic, developmental and environmental planning. And you will see that for the very first time, Cape Town has understood that you can't have separate planning lines for the environment, for development, and for economic growth. They have to come together. Otherwise, you end up with an unresolvable tension between them, between the developers and the environmentalists. And I must say that there is always that tension, but we have to understand that unless development happens, we won't have jobs, and unless development is environmentally sustainable, we will undermine what we think is progress, and we will create more problems than we resolve. So all of those things have to come together. But every planner in this room knows how frustrated I get by the obstacles that I believe that planning often puts in the way of progress. And it doesn't help knowing all the things that we know if we can't act on them and can't get ahead of the wave. We know that we have the very best potential sources of wind, sun, and wave energy in the world. We've got what I call the oil wells of the green economy, right here. We've got abundant natural gas, which is much more environmentally friendly, and it's offshore, it's not under the Karoo, so let's not start a big fight about that. It's offshore, and we can use enormous amounts of that and get a much bigger component of that into our baseload. But if we're going to do that, we've got to see that that's necessary. We've got to release the land, we've got to get it zoned properly, we've got to make the environment attractive to investors, we've got to make them think that we want them because we do, and we have to remove every single bit of red tape that we possibly can to make that possible. And every planner must understand that they have a nice, comfortable job, but when they sit behind their desk, they've got to think of the hundreds of jobs that become possible with green development and make it happen.
He is the director of the Institute for Human Health and Performance at the University College London. Hugh obtained a first-class degree in neuropharmacology and cardiorespiratory physiology in 1984. He graduated from the Middlesex Hospital Medical School in 1987. He has since trained to specialist status in general internal medicine, cardiology, and intensive care. He is now Professor of Intensive Care Medicine and Director of the Institute for Human Health and Performance, University College London, where he leads a research group. He's published over 200 scientific articles, and he has been engaged in climate change and health for more than 10 years. He's written extensively and was a co-commissioner of the UCL Lancet Report on the health impacts of climate change. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hugh Montgomery.
I doubt there's a more important gathering of people in the whole of Durban at the moment than you. And I doubt that I will ever have given a more important talk than that I'm about to give. Because I'm a Brit, though, I need to start with a joke before I get to the serious stuff. So here's my one climate change joke. Not many people know a climate change joke, but I do. So one planet's talking to another planet. And it says, I don't feel so good. I think I've got Homo sapiens. And the other planet says, I wouldn't worry, it doesn't last for long. This is where I work, and this is the sort of patient I look after. And sometimes patients like this end up on our intensive care unit dying and die because of some catastrophic event that's befallen them. They're hit by a truck. But far more often, they end up there because they become chronically sick that makes them vulnerable when that second hit arrives. And I'd like to start by giving you a brief outline of the chronic sickness that our world faces before we move on to that second hit. Here's human population. Whoever drew this graph probably got it wrong because humans didn't really turn up until around 140, 150,000 years ago. And there weren't very many of us around, probably around 70,000 years ago. There were no more than probably 5,000 breeding pairs on the planet. And it took us till around 1804 to get our first billion, and it took well over 120 years to get our next. But as we've worked our way up, we find that we're adding now another billion to our planet every 11 or 12 years. And each of those individuals, on average across the planet, has more money. That's not to say there isn't gross inequity in the world. Those of us, such as me, who live in central London, who fly to COP17s, who carry a mobile phone and use computers, use a vastly disproportionate amount of the Earth's resources than do others in poorer countries. But look at the data here. The amount of money per capita screaming upwards in these 1990 adjusted dollars. World economy in 1990 dollars, 600 billion in 1800, 4,000 billion in 1950, somewhere approaching 61 trillion in 2010, with average earnings per capita around the world rising steeply. The point I'm making is that those dollars are underpinned by resources, the resources that we all hold as common goods, the water, the soil, the rivers, the seas. And we're systematically destroying them. Here are the data just on fish stocks, 1961 to 2003. World population then had grown at 1.8% a year, fish consumption going up 3.6% a year, 17 kilograms per capita. And once again, a larger proportion of that being eaten in very rich nations. The result, fish stocks are collapsing. 40% of our fish stocks have collapsed already. We're having to grow more. World grain production having to rise, but we run out of land. This is underpinned by increased use of fertilizer, driven by fossil fuel use to do that, not by a particularly great increase in land mass, because we run out of the places to which we can grow grain. That said, we are having to use more land. We're grazing more cattle. This is world meat production, rising steadily. Now standing at 45 kilograms of meat per person. Again, Western nations, developed nations, consuming far more than their rightful share. And growing those crops and keeping those cattle means we need to use more land. This is why rainforests are disappearing. And they're not disappearing slowly. That means more water. I'll let you look at these figures for yourselves. And as a result of this, the world has water crises pretty much everywhere, because a great deal of the water we consume comes from fossil aquifers. These are sealed reservoirs of water that once emptied do not refill. And when they go, large numbers of people suffer. And we know, for instance, that Saudi Arabia's grain crop fell by 71% shortly after the year 2000 because of the loss of that water, which is why they're having to buy land elsewhere. All of that means less life. This from the Living Planet Index, which there's a new one just released 2010 actually. These are the changes that have happened since I was 20 years old. This is the biggest mass extinction that the planet has seen on the fossil record, and we're living through it now. Our planet's very sick indeed. That patient is already teetering on the brink, and if it suffers another blow, it will die. Especially if that blow is sudden and severe. When you talk to most people, the medical students here did a survey of delegates and negotiators last year, and they said to them, do you think climate change is a problem for health? A very large number had no idea that climate change had anything to do with people. And those that did felt that it was probably something a bit to do with malaria, and, quotes, the WHO can probably sort that out. There's a lot more to it. As temperatures rise, bacterial doubling rates increase, which is why you tend not to get so much diarrhea from eating chicken in England, which is generally a pretty chilly place, and you do if you go to warmer countries, because bacteria grow more quickly. The risk of malaria in some areas will definitely drop as swamps dry out and it becomes inclement, but in some areas it will rise. These were data, bear in mind, from low to mid-range estimates from 10 years ago. And as I've explained, we're way past those low-range estimates. So bear in mind, a lot of these scenarios are pathetically lightweight. Things will be much worse. Red represents the certainty of malarial transmission. And this was estimates on low to mid-range risk in the next 50 years. Why? Because in warmer climates, mosquitoes can live. As the temperature goes up, the malarial parasite replicates faster inside the mosquito, so the mosquito becomes infected more quickly. And this applies to other things like dengue. The viral incubation period shortens, the breeding cycle of the mosquito shortens, and they feed more frequently because they're buzzing around a lot more when it's warmer. Higher temperatures kill. We are evolved as multi-celled organisms over 540 million years to a very niche range of temperatures. And as temperatures rise, mortality rates rise. So these are just deaths in the United Kingdom. As it gets warmer, people die more. And you can see that anywhere in the world. These are data from Delhi, just a few seasons, showing seasonal changes. That as it gets warmer, people die, as it gets cooler, people don't. This is just a function of human biology. Increased baseline temperatures change levels of pollutants. And these are physicochemical reactions from pollutants. So tailpipe exhaust emissions in New York, concentrations of ozone rise as temperatures rise. That's not because more cars are on the road, it's because of the nature of the chemistry of the atmosphere. And ground level ozone is very harmful to the respiratory tracts of humans. We change the way in which plant pollen is released. Pollen seasons lengthen. They start earlier, they go on longer. Many plants produce more pollen as it's warmer. And there is a shift in some species, and we're looking particularly at ragweed pollen, to much more allergenic forms of pollen around the world. But as you put more energy into a meteorological system, that energy appears in the form of weather. Now, the recent UN report said that it couldn't say with confidence that previous increases or recent increases in extreme weather events can be said to be due to climate change. But those of us that are scientists and physicians in this audience understand well that lack of evidence is not the same as evidence of lack. And somehow we have to account for this increase in extreme weather events over recent decades. And even in the United States, increase in tornadoes. The point I'm trying to make here is developed nations in many ways feel that they are secure from these effects of climate change, and they are not. Just as there's a global economy, we live in a global atmosphere, and every nation will be affected. I'm going to make reference to this report in the future. I just put it up there so that you know the source as we move forwards. Published in November of this year, last month. Cyclone wind intensity will increase as you warm ocean surfaces. Hurricanes become stronger. And we've seen strong hurricanes and the damage they cause. But we're going to see more of that sort of damage. We know that when you get these extreme weather events, soils become unstable due to drying, glacial retreat, sudden downpours, producing catastrophic landslide. These are likely to increase. High confidence. There's some myth about rainfall and climate that some areas will become less fertile because there'll be a little less water, it'll be warmer. Other areas will be more CO2, warmer, more rainfall, more crops. That's a nonsense, because even if you get that improvement in ability to grow crops, one sudden downfall, one big drought at the wrong time, and that crop is written off. And we're likely to see increases in severe precipitation events. And indeed, we are. I don't think we need to look further than Pakistan, which suffered horribly. A fifth of its land area underwater last year. Many, many millions of people affected and crops lost. We think of Vietnam and Thailand now, similarly affected, and their people suffering. Coastal flooding will worsen because of extreme storms, sea level rise, and so forth. This is likely to get worse. We're seeing these events already. And we're going to see more extreme heat waves. These are the anomalies for June 2010. Some areas cooler than you'd expect. Some areas, the red dots, very, very much warmer. August 2003, heat wave in Europe killed perhaps up to 75,000 people. And we're going to see more of these, according to that UN report. Look here. very likely the length and intensity and severity of these heat waves will rise. A 1 in 20-year hottest day is likely to become a 1 in 2-year event. Think of Russia last year. Massive droughts leading to forest fires. Vast areas affected, crops failing. Large areas unable to export wheat. And these sorts of events, flooding, drought, extreme weather, means there's a shortage of food. Shortage of food makes it become more expensive. Then people start speculating on the price of food, and it drives the price up further. Which is all very well if you live in central London on a doctor's salary. It's not acceptable when you're living on the breadline in a poorer nation state and you can no longer feed your family. We know from Nick Stern's data that climate change will be catastrophic to economies, and we know that poverty drives ill health. And we know that when you have starvation and drought and loss of habitation and disease and poverty, people will move. And when they move into other areas that are similarly distressed, you get conflict. This even from 2003, from a Pentagon report. The result could be a significant drop in the human carrying capacity of the Earth's environment. That's talking about deaths. And they're not alone in saying this. We co-authored an article for the British Medical Journal just recently, drawing on statements from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, from the CIA, from organisations that you and I would perhaps not normally consider to be the most liberal organisations in the world. But they are concerned. I was deeply impressed with the Minister's words earlier on. I've been to many meetings about climate and health. He's, believe it or not, the first person I've heard that actually starts talking about ecosystem effects. Because we're at the top of an ecological pyramid, and if that collapses beneath us, our foundations are lost. Again, this paper now some 7 years old, and from what I've told you before, we're now exceeding the worst case scenarios that have been predicted by the IPCC earlier on. This happening on top of that mass extinction event about which I spoke earlier. So the question then, have we a terminal disease now? Or is there a cure? I don't know. If there is a cure, it's in your hands. And that's why you are the most important people in Durban today. Because no one else is listening, and they have to listen, and they have to listen urgently to you. We need to inform patients, we need to inform our colleagues, we need to inform our politicians. Because if you work in health, unlike politicians generally in the world, or bankers, you're trusted to speak the truth. You must speak this truth of the risks, but also the benefits. In Western worlds, if we substitute driving for walking, we get reductions in diabetes, obesity, stroke, coronary vascular disease, peripheral vascular disease, hypertension, depression, dementia, breast cancer, bowel cancer. As a Western white male in Britain, the second most likely thing from which I will die is bowel cancer. And any of you who've seen someone die of that disease, it's horrible. The biggest preventable cause is saturated fat consumption from red meat and red meat consumption. Reducing those, taking more exercise, benefits the planet, and it benefits the health of our country, it benefits our health economics. We have a good selling point here, and Andy Haynes will be here this afternoon to show that not only does this apply to Europe, huge fiscal savings, but he modelled this around the world for different countries, of different levels of poverty, different cities, and showed, I won't go through these in detail, except to say, very big advantages wherever you are in the world. This is a convenient truth, and we need to communicate this. You need to take personal actions. And we need to advocate and engage. This is Jean-Paul Sartre, and I want to remind you of his words. It is not right to want to heal the suffering of people without committing to fight the very causes of that suffering. We have a responsibility here today to do this. We have a responsibility not to sit on the sidelines of these negotiations, to think that we're marginal to them. The health message is central. Our politicians must understand that people are suffering and dying now, and that very, 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 very many more will suffer and die in the future unless they act now. The talk about delays for 8 years are a frank nonsense, and we must say so to our ministers and to those that we know. These are personal thoughts. I'm not going to suggest that they're the thoughts of this conference, although there is a conference statement I'd encourage you to read and sign. We need to know what we're missing. We need to fill the gap. We need an urgent negotiated deal that's meaningful. We need to measure where we are. We need to put the money into the system. We need to make it available to those countries that need it. And we need to give them power over its use. And we need to sort out deforestation. Those are just headlines. They're personal views, but I think you may or may not agree. And we need to stand up for what's right. Waiting for everyone else to do something before you do does not show moral leadership. So, from where I come from, the EU, in my view, should just go ahead anyway, making its reductions. Finally, this statement will be circulated, is circulating. Some nation states have already signed up to it. We're asking negotiators in their opening plenary sessions to start their negotiations with these words. We'll circulate those for you. It will show solidarity amongst those states to say this is a matter of urgency. The point I want to make is that if we spend another 8 years with 40,000 delegates coming to COP processes such as this, neatly drafting a prescription for our planet, the patient will have died by the time we finish that prescription. And that matters. And it matters to me, and it matters to me personally. This is Fergus. He's my youngest son. And I love him every bit as much as you love your children or your grandchildren. And if you're not going to do this for other people's children, you must do it for your own. Because let me remind you, this isn't a joke. I think I've got Homo sapiens. Don't worry. They won't last for long. Thank you for listening.
We believe from the least developed countries and vulnerable communities that climate change is a moral problem. It's a problem created by the rich countries, rich people in poor countries, and a problem that the poor are going to suffer. Poor people in poor countries, but even poor people in rich countries. A stark example is the people of New Orleans who suffered at when Hurricane Katrina hit there. Over 1,000 people in the richest country died. They weren't rich people of New Orleans, they were the poorest people living in the 9th ward of New Orleans. So poor people, even in rich countries, are the ones that are most vulnerable. That's not right. That's a morally unacceptable situation where the rich cause suffering to the poor without taking responsibility for it.
So I'm Alicia Harold-Coley, a marine scientist with Oceana, and we're very concerned about ocean acidification, which is the oceans becoming more acidic because they're absorbing carbon dioxide. And this higher acidity has negative impacts for many marine species and can possibly even cause crashes in marine ecosystems, marine food webs. We're looking at the possible decline, possible extinction even, of coral reefs by the end of this century. So we're extremely concerned about the oceans becoming more acidic. So the oceans absorb carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide bonds with ocean water to create an acid, carbonic acid. And that is how the oceans are becoming more acidic. And it's really important that individuals act by themselves to reduce their carbon emissions, but even more importantly, they need to be telling their policymakers, the people here today who are in Cancun, deciding what the future is going to be for the whole world, that they demand their policymakers really set low emissions and really reduce their emission targets for the future.
It's very weird. We're over there. Okay, and you came in through a gate up there. And there's up there. And there's all the milkwood forest there, and there's a nice big milkwood forest there. The idea is actually there's a small fence there, is to cut this off. This is for agricultural integrated farming, and this is 700 hectare to get it back as natural as possible. This is all game fence. The whole thing's game fence, which I found out yesterday that I need to get a permit now. That they must come out and they must inspect my game fence for me.
But hang on a sec, John, wasn't you telling us that they're finding out that fynbos is much more nutritious for many more animals than even the regular things that they've been eating up till now?
Yeah, especially the game.
Well, yeah, and that's fine. And they're doing that, and they're eating there, and it's fine. I mean, all I have to do with the game, because they're all browsers, all I have to do with the game is give them a lick, which just clears any. It's a lot of cactus in it, and I put some carbon into it. We'll make up aromatics. Just to keep them healthy, as far as parasites go, as much as possible. And that's fine. I don't give any other feed to them. But I'm talking about feeding into the local community, which is grains, dairy. How are we going to do that then? And I don't, frankly, don't really hold too much what nature conservation is saying. I'm going to do it anyway, because within my own integrity, I feel a 10% or even less, 8% payoff of utilizing the land to maintain 700 hectares of pristine land is a fair swap.
Actually, I mean, for example, in our area, Stellenbosch area, it's the other way around. Is they are trying to persuade farmers to put 10% to pristine. Yeah. So your figures are inverted.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really give too much a hoot to what nature conservation do. I feel that my integrity.
I have a funny feeling that nature conservation are locked into a few strange paradigms.
Yeah.
What would you say were the paradigms?
Well, in short, I would say there's an element of a kind of eco-fascism. They're not thinking holistically. I mean, you've pointed out is the sustainability. Sustainability is a major issue. How do you sustain, and there's a financial element as well as all the ecological elements and social elements. How do you sustain something? Is often they have ideas, is like who is footing the bill?
Well, I'm footing the bill.
quite. They're not footing the bill.
No.
So they're making prescriptions
Yeah.
without having any financial responsibility for the decisions that they're making.
Well, you see, the next argument to me is they're saying, well, these soils here are hydrophobic. You can't grow anything on them. And I say, excuse me, I'll grow anything on anything.
Yeah.
I'm the largest biochar carbon producer in the country right now. I know within 3 months we did our first harvest here of all our vegetables, whatever, that we eat from every day here. Because I know how to work with the soil. And that's not for them to dictate to me that I can't produce food. I can produce food anyway, within reason.
Yeah.
Which we can do. I mean, right now, just getting a 4% fixed carbon holding capacity in your soil allows the microbial behavior to start taking place again, and we can work with that soil. Now, there's certain biomes that don't want that, and this is possibly one of them on that side there. But because of the constant burning, it's almost got a resin on top of the sand. So you go out there, and when it rains, nothing stays in the soil. It all just runs off and runs away. The moment you get your carbon back into it, you change the game. Right now, in the agricultural sector, which I work in and have worked intensively for the last several years, if you look at your parts of the country which our food comes from, which are probably the worst place to be planting food, like if you look at the Northwest Province, the Free State, there's 0.1% fixed carbon content in those areas. The other areas which form traditional homelands or whatever, nothing's happening in there because there can be so the bank can't hold those, can't hold the bond to assist those farmers to get into debt. The long and the short of it is our farmers are, the biggest problem in agriculture, the way I see it, are farmers. And it starts at what's been passed on through the generations, which is more involved in bottom line, and they have no relationship, and I speak with a broad brush here, but there obviously are exceptions. There's no maintaining the soil conditions. Everything just gets sprayed ripe or sprayed at different levels. The amount of chemicals going on and to the product and to the soil is now reached a point where nature's fighting back. The yields are down. Anyone's saying it's a drought, but even it's nonsense. The chemical guys who get in at the university level, so they basically fund the Department of Soil Science, which is based on an NPK ratio. Now, you can use this amazing tool on the internet, and I challenge you to go and find me scientific proof that backs up that the NPK ratio will actually give you a healthy, balanced product. It's absolute nonsense. It's a fantasy. And it's prescribed at the education level in order to get these young farmers into that system as quickly as possible. So right now in America, they've all woken up and they've gone to carbon-based farming now. They're getting carbon into their soil. Europe's there, Australia's there, they need it desperately and they're getting into it. They're after our product quite a lot. Here, the guys are so intertwined with the chemical guys. Because if somebody arrives at your farm and he's going to give you his magic potion, a chemical cocktail, which is going to sort everything out, and he's going to give you 90 days credit. And he's going to talk your language. Because if you go back to the old extension officer, he was basically a snakeskin oil salesman. What do they call him? He was just selling Panas or New Landis or whatever. That's what he was really doing there. The problem that we've got now is that these soils are holding like 4% of those chemicals. The rest is going straight through into the water table. We did tests of the water tables now in the Northwest Province. You won't believe you put that stuff on your lips and it starts to, yeah, it's unbelievable. So we've destroyed the waterways, the soils aren't holding anything, and the answer of the chemical companies is just to spray more. That's what they're saying, spray more. Right now, SA breweries are using 300 litres of water to produce 1 litre of beer. So we've developed a seed for them to get the carbon on there and all these things, and they're not prepared to change what they're doing. Never mind that the... and so, but what I find is quite interesting, right, is because we've got quite a lot of guys out there now, especially within the organic movement, guys selling guano, fertilizers or teas, compost teas and things like that. And they're right now in the eastern part of the country dealing with the banana farmers and all these guys. And they're not really interested in the banana farmers because they're just spraying it right with chemicals. It's what's always worked. It's how their model works. It's the bottom line figure. Yet, I do believe, because that's all export, it's all export produce, I do believe that the world is waking up, that people are waking up. They're realizing the cancer causing effects of this stuff, and they don't want it anymore. And I think that is going to be a very strong dictator back to the agribusinessmen. I don't want to call them farmers anymore, the agribusinessmen, to change what they're doing. They're doing it in America, they're doing it in Europe. South Africa is so entrenched in the old school mentality of doing it. This is the way they've been, this is the way that my fathers did it. And until that really changes at that level where it affects their bottom line profit, they're just going to carry on. Destroying the waterways. The soil is just used as a medium to hold the plant up. That's all. And everything else is just applied to it. So our approach now is actually not to fight that fight, because it's exhausting. It's really to take the battle to the individual. Everybody needs to have a garden in their homes right now. I mean, the food prices are unbelievable, and it's just the beginning of what we're about to see now. By August, it's going to be on the streets. And everybody has to, I would say by April, be producing 20 to 25% of their grocery bill in their home. Have to be. They have to be saving at least 10 to 15,000 litres of water in storage, and they have to have at least 30 to 40% of their own energy needs. Otherwise, they're just behind the game. And by the end of the year, those figures have got to double. Judging where we are, where I'm seeing it, from an agricultural, energy, and water point of view, that the individual in their home needs to be producing about 25% by April of their, and I think that's even a kind figure, but about 25 to 30% of their produce in and around their domicile in their homes. They need to be saving 10 to 15,000 litres of water, and they need to be up to about 30 to 40% energy, whether it's a solar geyser, just finding new ways of being able to have some sort of form of renewable energy in their site. They are just out of the game. And by the end of the year, you've got to look at doubling those figures. I don't know right now how people are actually able to get through. And I'm talking about folk who have a job, who live in the city, how they're able, if they're not earning between 80 and 100,000 Rand a month with a family, I don't know how they're doing it. I'm not getting it. You know, unless they're just absolutely just eating sugar and starch. And which has all sorts of other complications and things like that. And this is only the beginning. Because everybody was I mean, I spent last week, for my sins, watching this whole State of the Nation absolute fiasco. And the political bullshit that was flung around. And the blatant lies. You know, while this was going on, and they're saying, and the Minister of Water or whatever, social infrastructure was saying what a great story she has to tell. Sabi, and no one was reported in the news, but Sabi was actually locked down. People in the streets, we got videos of it, guns, businesses closed, and it's because of water, because there's no delivery of water. It's all over, it's happening all over the country. So either the politicians are just playing into this is a year of elections and just tell the sheep what they need to hear, or they're so far removed of what's actually going on. The Deputy Minister of Agriculture gets up. I mean, this is a guy who was chairman, wasn't he? I mean, he was up for some corruption issue. I don't know how he's worked his way back into this thing. And he turned around and said, oh, well, we don't have to import the 6 million tons anymore. We've had these rains now. And so it saved the situation, and we're only looking at 2 to 3 million tons. First of all, nothing was planted in December. I did a tour of the country in spring, in September. I did a tour of the country at the beginning of December, just to go and look at the farms. I would say 20%, what normally gets planted was planted. And of that 20%, unless it's under irrigation, which those farms are not even working anymore because the soil's not being held, they're working at about another 20% of that. So you're looking at about 20% yield. There's nothing. We can't import any food because we don't have the mechanisms at the harvest to import it. Never mind the financial situation, the cost of it. The animal feed that we have to import into the country is all based on the Chicago stock exchanges, which is all in dollars. It's just, this is endgame scenario, unless you are producing food in your own home. So that's where the battle we're going. We're trying to get carbon into people's homes, into their gardens. This is how you do it, and button down the hatches.
Can I say something at this point?
You can't.
We can. We've got to change.
No,
this is time for radical change now.
Well,
we got to survive.
You're talking about 58 million people who have grown up on a diet of starch and sugar. And the starch comes from grains.
But that doesn't make it right.
No, it doesn't make it right. But we're talking about social unrest right now. Okay, we're talking about where people can't afford to put food on the table. When I met you in the Transkei, we produced every kind of brassica, legume. Nobody ever ate that stuff. They would go down to the bungalows, sell it to them, get their money, go to the spaza, and continue to buy the grain-based. You're not going to change, as much as you want to radically change it. We're talking about the folk in the country who have had the worst diets and the worst education. They've also been exposed to the best land in the country. That's besides the point. Okay? And they've grown up in a culture that they have perceived to be right. Whether you or I say it's right or wrong is really irrelevant at this situation where we are now, at this juncture, politically, socially. When I suffered terribly as well from the whole grain thing. I for my sins, I love bread. I really do. I was in Germany a few months ago. I tell you, I could eat bread as much as I wanted, and I absolutely felt perfect. You know, up in Scandinavia where it's non-GMO, but we're not here to. This is not even bread. This dwarf wheat that we are producing here, it's based again on bottom line. It's just pumped full of chemicals. It's not even. I want to show you something.
It's not even wheat.
It's not even wheat. Okay.
What, it's not even wheat?
Here we go.
No, Judy.
I'm going to explain
We've
something.
forgotten.
Yeah, let me explain. Sorry, John.
Yeah.
Forgive me on
Just let him
this.
say this, please.
Well, just on this, we've forgotten what a wheat plant is actually about. You know, it's the whole manner of production. If we think of our conversation before of the bacterial, the micro, you know, like the probiotic, if you use that word, element to a grain. Grains actually have a big plus in that term, is that they're providing a whole section that is not provided by other foods. Grains are as ancient almost as humans. but the modern day, what we call wheat, is a distant relative to, and definitely the agronomy, the way we're producing it is a nightmare. I mean, in terms of carbon, I mean, wheat, theoretically speaking, is a brilliant plant for recarbonizing soil, but we don't farm it, manage it in that kind of way, because we devastate the land, we shift it, and whereas if we were to consciously use the roots of a wheat plant and the straw in a more creative way, we could reverse our soils very rapidly.
What would you do?
Well, firstly, leaving the roots and the mulch.
Yeah. I agree.
This is a very, very interesting little, to give strength to what John's saying here. I want to give you this example, because what we've basically done, we've taken the wolf and we've turned it into the Dachshund, which I really can't fathom. Not that, it's just really
The
sad.
wolf into the Dachshund.
It's your sausage dog. Wool free, runs through the forest, packs of them, Now we created the Dachshund. Little legs, this animal with such a beautiful big spirit, with these massive, to go down holes, to take up rats and rabbits for us, We're a very strange species. So this is Roy-Krantz, okay? Vegetation. It could be anything, organic, grown. It's a cellulose material. And this is the carbon. This is about 92% pure carbon. It's beautiful, okay? So it goes through, it's not a pyrolysis process, it's a gasification process, okay? We take this and we put it through an updraft gasifier, okay? So what we're basically doing is we're removing the hydrogen and we turn that into pure energy, okay? And we get massive amount of energy from this. In fact, on themselves. Okay, I don't know if I've seen the videos. From that, so we take this carbon, we put it into a gasifier, and we break it down to its trace elements, and we get this, which looks like stones. That's what comes out of it. That's the effluent. You know what that is? Manganese.
Manganese.
Lead, iron, boron, all the elements. It separates the elements, calcium. Okay? So if you look at your periodic table, so I've got one somewhere here.
Next to us.
Yeah, it's fine. No, that's fine. So here we go. There's the iron, manganese, calcium, zinc. That's what this is over here. It comes out of this, the trace elements. All right. And where does that come from? It comes from the soil. These are the trace elements that come from the soil. And these elements are critical for our well-being. We need them. We need to, it's what connects us to the earth. It's what keeps us well and healthy.
Then why are you making it into black rocks?
No, I'm explaining something to you. Okay. It's critical for this thing. All your aquaculture, hydroponics that are not based on soil, and even the agriculture that John's referring to here, which is basically just using the soil as a medium to keep it upright. And it's just being chemically bathed to create growth. It looks like a spinach. It might even taste our perception of what a spinach we think tastes like. But it's not a spinach. It's a little Molotov cocktail, really, of chemicals. Because all of this is missing from it. And this is where all our diseases come from, because we don't have these in us anymore. And that really, there's a bit of grain for you. I think putting that in Judy was there. And I think this is what we're missing in our diets, in the way they produce what we perceive food now, but it's just really a commercially viable, bottom line, profit-based cocktail of chemicals that we consume, because it misses all of this.
Can I just ask you a question, and both of you in fact, because I was under the impression that the most important, one of the worst things that you can do is to burn. It's been the crash and burn, slash and burn It's been the way that people have fertilized their crops for a very, very long time. But I've understood for a long time that that's actually the wrong thing to do, because if you put it in the ground without burning it first, it's got far more ability to retain water and to sustain a whole lot of underground organisms. Whereas if you burn it first, it just becomes, as you said, manganese and those things.
You're talking about the biomass?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so I thought about...
And John said that there's a massive shortage of organic material in order to...
Yeah, okay, so...
But this is a specialized burning, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is something different
It's
here.
something completely different.
What is happening?
Okay, so for example, if you take a Port Jackson tree and you burn it over a fire or whatever, an open fire, and you take the ash or the coal from that and you put it back into the soil, it's only really good for planting more Port Jackson trees because of the tannins. Trees have an amazing way, they take over areas, and their trace elements are encapsulated in that charcoal. So you need to go and say, oh, well, it's fantastic, we've burnt this stuff up and now we're going to grow something else. It will really struggle, fight against those tannins. But when you take the process, and as what John says is right, it's a different process, up above 80% pure carbon. This is not a fertilizer or compost, although there are trace elements in it. But what it really is soil amender. It amends the soil. A gram of this, okay, so half a teaspoon of fine carbon, give me a teaspoon there, okay, let's say that's a gram, okay, has a surface area of about a rugby field.
What? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so the lesions, there are so many, it's so porous, the lesions in it are homes for microbial activity to take place. They're not the compost. So what you do is you take your carbon and you inoculate it. Now, the other word that people say that they activate it. Activating is taking superheated steam, like at 400 degrees, and pushing it through it, and it makes it even, it almost doubles, get up to about 1,000 square meters of surface area per gram. That's what you use to purify water in your filters and things like that. But for agricultural purposes, this is more enough. So you would take a kilogram of this, a liter of compost tea. So like a guarana tea, or you get any organic compost tea, or chemical if that's your poison, and you leave it overnight. It will become a dry, crumbly substance that you then put into your soil. Now you're putting the life back into it, into the soil. So what basically happens is that when the root system goes down into the soil, it starts letting off exudates. Now what the exudates are doing is that they're looking for interaction with the soil. But our soil is so dead that until there's chemicals and being sprayed on it, it can't get anywhere. And that's what you do. You stimulate it through the chemicals. The soil has everything required for that. We just don't use it anymore. We just put it to sleep. So now we're creating the microbial behavior around the root zone to allow these exudates to interact with the soil, and now you start having proper growth. The roots start going down. So it becomes the home. It puts the life back into the carbon. What it also does is it holds material. So in other words, when it rains, when you've got a 4% fixed carbon content in your soil, you're going up to about 80% holding capacity. So this drought that we're currently experiencing really would not be anywhere near the severity of what it is if we had the correct carbon content in our soils.
Can I just stop this for a moment to put in at this point, John? On the way here, you were talking about the microbiological that the bacteria in the soil are now being found to be a very, very important aspect of our nutrition and also of plant health, something like this. So,
Yeah, that's
what
true.
Luke's
But
talking
what,
about-
what he's, look, what Luke is saying is that something like this carbon becomes a home for those bacteria. I mean, I personally would probably look at something like a worm tea to inoculate it,
Perfect.
you know?
That's we're working with the worm. That's the casing, yeah.
I mean, everything Luke has said I would agree with. We've now so destroyed our soil that we have to resort to remedial action like this. Is we can't just look at a natural process. But this is a means to reintroduce the thousands of species that there seem to be of microbial life that is essential for that vitality and health. I mean, I would definitely agree with what he's saying regarding the drought. The drought has been created by the denudation, the removal of soil carbon. I mean, most, as he's already said, agricultural soils are less than 1% carbon now. So how is it going to hold water? And if you consider that actually most of our fresh water is held in the soil, never mind the dams and all that, the most important reservoir for water is the soil. It's a buffer, and it feeds our natural systems of springs and boreholes and so on. It feeds the transpiration flow for plants back into the atmosphere. So without that bank reservoir of water in the soil, which is dependent on soil carbon or plants, we're heading for the crisis that Luke was talking about. Not heading, we're in it actually.
And the other one that I'm seeing, which I alluded to a bit earlier on, is those critical aquifers that you're talking about, is how we're poisoning them.
Oh yeah.
Because the soil is not holding the chemicals back.
It's just going
It's going straight through. It's going straight through down in there. And that is another, I mean, you know, what I find so amazing about this whole thing, and one can get really emotional about it, that when you approach the farm with facts, when you show that here is the water that we've tested. Here's the independent test of the water. Here's this. This is what's actually happening. I don't care.
That's what they say.
Yeah, they do not care. The only
They should be taken off the land.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
the time's come
The
for that.
worst problem that we have in agriculture is farmers.
Yeah.
And I'm a farmer. And it goes back to the education, but they are so desperate, they are so leveraged. I mean, I'm going to the banks, and I'm saying to the banks, hold on guys. FNB, you're holding billions now of agricultural debt. You're the biggest. Okay. What's your, how you got this guy by the balls? What are you holding on to? Well, we're holding on to his land. Okay. But that land's useless. So your asset that you're holding on
It's no longer an asset.
is no longer an asset. You've got to take some of that interest and you've got to get carbon into it because A, you're giving the poor farmer, agribusinessman, slave, a chance to pay it back because you can actually start producing something again. And B, at least you're upping the value of your specific choice of torture. So it's guys, absolutely, because this is the way it's being done. And this is what I find so terrifying, is that, because everybody's motivated by different things. For me, it's my kids. It's my kids they motivate me, and the way I see it, they don't stand a chance to one day nurture their own kids at the current trajectory. And the destruction based on a greed, a model of corporate greed, partnered with political ineptitude, partnered with the biggest culprit of all, which is us and our ambivalence to this situation, because that is the only place that we can control. We can't control these corporate moguls, these political buffoons, but we have control over ourselves. We have to be that change. That is the responsibility. But unfortunately, the ambivalence that is out there is, I don't want to know. I don't want to be, don't tell me I don't want to deal with that, you know. That is the only place that we can create changes within ourselves.
I heard a very interesting comment the other day. They said the dinosaurs did not die out because they were hit by a comet. The world was hit by a comet. They died out because they didn't adjust to the changes that resulted in the world being hit by a comet. And that's what's going to happen to us. Or is happening to us because we refuse to change according to the circumstances that we've got.
And the thing is, we don't need a comet. We're the comet. You know, we really are. We are the comet. We are, at the expense of earning a living, we're destroying the very organism that keeps us alive. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. It defies logic. So unless we now, these corporate businesses consider the environment as an equal partner in everything, there is no future. It's not worth investing in that, and I'm not the first person to say that. Unless we consider the social ramifications of our businesses that we're involved in. You're delusional. These are volatile times. We've got masses, millions of people out there who have been brought up on a diet of sugar and starch, who are dependent on a political system that is so un-African, and an education system that is the worst in the world. So you have a situation where there's no neural activity taking place. There's mass ignorance going on, and everybody's pointing fingers at everybody and stirring the pot. It is dangerous, dangerous times, and that's why you go through two gates to get to me. You know, and that's not even safe enough. We are living in incredibly dangerous times. And it doesn't have to be like it. It can change. This radical change, Julie, that you're speaking of, it is possible. But you need to understand that you're talking about generations. You've got to get into the education systems. And it all starts with nutrition. You've got to get your soil right. You've got to get people eating so that they can actually start to receive information again. You know, standing on a soapbox is really just not going to do it. You've got to get into the schools. You've got to get into people's homes. But you're breaking through an incredible gate, a mental shift. And I'm afraid it needs to collapse. That is the way of Africa. Let it collapse and crash, and the sooner the better, because then the less pain. But this prolonged Chinese drip torture especially for the kids, is just beyond excruciating now. It's got to come to that end. And I think we have the perfect president to allow that to happen right now. He's the right guy. He's just the perfect. We couldn't have asked for a better buffoon to activate this collapse.
Here we have an environment that's as close to pristine as you'll probably ever get. And in an environment like this you can see living water, and it's such a contrast to what you find in most agricultural systems, where water is invisible. It's almost entirely vanished from the soil, and all we really saw when we were passing through a lot of those agricultural lands was a lot of bare soil. And really, it's not surprising that our health in the national population is declining so much, is when we have food coming from such an impoverished environment. What's been shown in recent years with the movement and the interest in probiotic foods is the significance of having a healthy soil, in that a healthy food is in fact a home for a host of beneficial bacteria and fungi or microflora that are essential for our health. And once you start depleting a soil of its soil life, it doesn't become possible for the food from that area to have those populations of beneficial microflora in them. It's also, what you're getting now is a wheat plant, for example, in that when we're going through the wheatlands, is so far removed from the original kinds of wheat that were cultivated and eaten by people. And that really applies across the board of all the varieties of food that we're eating, in that most of the products now are hardly recognizable compared to the original varieties that we were eating. But it's even seen and actually become in certain parts quite fashionable amongst chefs that it's the probiotic or the biotic elements, the flora that are contained within a food plant that give it the more subtle and tasty qualities that are appreciated by the fashion in cooking these days and are so vital to our health. It seems strange that we have to go and buy from the chemist a formulation of microorganisms, whereas if we only chose correctly, we could be eating homegrown organic food that contains the same kind of microflora that now a modern person in the city has to go and purchase over the counter at the pharmacy. Yeah, I mean, we have a pandemic of diabetes, a whole lot of other health complaints, an increase in cancers, a whole lot of reproductive problems that can be directly correlated to poor diet, and a diet of often very questionable products, particularly, I would say, on the genetically modified foods. And yet no one is taking any notice of the warning signs that are there where populations are eating those foods. And it's not going to be your chemical tests, like I've seen some comparisons done where there's not a discernible difference in terms of chemical properties between foods, but very little testing is ever done on the biotic component of foods. There are some tests, such as the Brix tests, which are used in the wine industry, which do show a significant difference. But yet it's those probiotic elements, and each of those bacteria have a whole genetic formulation, in a sense, imprint that activates our own health and immune system and gives a resistance to disease. Yeah, but I think what's more important is what we're saying with Luke, Judy, in that, just think of what he's done. Like a small area like that, and he's feeding how many people? 20 people.
Imagine if he
in
took
a
a
sense,
little bit more land and did more. Would feed a lot of people.
But is that the option? To go on a model, you're still going to have to transport everything around?
Yeah, but it could be done nearby where everybody lives. However many people there are, you have that much space.
You have an insane situation where large numbers of people move from highly fertile, well-watered areas into urban slums where there is massive desertification, huge endemics of disease and health problems. They have a poor diet. They live incredibly stressful lives. Whereas if communities were encouraged to develop the areas that they came from, you would have a massively healthier population there wouldn't be issues of unemployment because you are engaged actively in providing your sustenance and shelter. There wouldn't be any of the same kind of social stresses and so on that exist. And they would be eating healthy food daily, you know, in areas that have the greatest potential. So we've got things upside down in a sense. We have the Western Cape, where land is the most expensive, and yet even from a conventional perspective, it's the least productive agricultural land. And yet daily we have a massive mushrooming of the population on a piece of ground that cannot really sustain it. Both in terms of water, the energy question, we then have compounded problems of pollution, and never mind all the multitude of social issues of a large concentration of people who don't really have employment. It would definitely, I mean, I really admire those initiatives that have taken place in those communities to provide food and income, because there is such a premium now on producing food, and the cost of food is escalating almost daily. So those initiatives that have taken place in our high-density suburbs of the Western Cape are actually doing extremely well in that they are generating a fair income and showing that it is possible to produce food under extreme conditions. And perhaps one of the most remarkable things about the Western Cape is how much it can produce on what is considered, from conventional terms, poor soil. And yet the Cape sustains a massive population and, relatively speaking, has a massive production. And if those kind of efforts were applied in the more naturally fertile parts of the country, this country, I think, would be the breadbasket of Africa. As it stands, we're facing a crisis of having to import most of our food.
What about the water here?
Well, here you've got living water. If you look at the water, it's moving and swirling and pulsing. There's light and dark. And this is the kind of water that, from a biological perspective, is able to bring nutrients and bring health and carry and sustain life. When you have water that has gone through an industrial process, the molecules of water are in a chaotic state and are not able to carry the active minerals or nutrients that they are. They also don't have the health-giving properties that a living water like this would have. And water such as this has the abilities to sustain plants, whereas water that has been denatured and with life destroyed out of it is not able to sustain life, or you certainly need a great deal more volume than you would with living water such as this.
Have you ever seen the results of the difference of plants fed with one and plants fed with the other?
The most dramatic example of that really occurs with rainfall. It's extraordinary. Like the other day, we had a light rain of less than 3 millimeters in the garden that I'm responsible for nurturing at the moment. And yet for 2-3 days afterwards, there was no need to do any irrigation, and all of the plants perked up noticeably. There was a visible increase in growth and a kind of vibrancy to the foliage of the plants in the garden. Whereas you can, during the more harsher periods when there was no rainfall, you can irrigate like mad, and somehow that vitality in the plants was not as evident as a mere shower of 3 millimeters of rain.
What do you put that down to?
Living water is that water that goes through the natural water cycle and is activated by the process of precipitation, the flow forms that are taking place in cloud, and so you have biologically active living water. Whereas Water that's gone through an irrigation system is contaminated with pollutants. It's dead water, it's been sitting in a reservoir, so it's not circulating, and simply does not have the quality that natural rainfall has on a plant.
If you were to make a proposal of what is the best way of utilizing our precious water in a time of extreme drought, in the best possible way we can to produce just the most nutrient foods in the best way, how would you recommend we spend that water?
Well, we have a number of anomalies. We use massive volumes of water in industry. We use massive volumes of water in domestic situations. We have a situation in the Western Cape where water is distributed at random through the townships without any charge. And it's not surprising then that you find that in the Western Cape is using almost up to 40% of its capacity water a year. And actually the highest proportion is to the city. I mean, I think it's a fallacy that the farmers are using it all up. It's urban developments. One of the most inefficient uses of water takes place on a thing like a golf course, or what I call green deserts and lawns, where massive volumes of water are pumped out onto a surface. They then move through the system and end up causing drainage problems. So our design on the water system is short and lacking. I know for certain that the same amount of water that is applied, for example, onto a golf course could sustain quite a number of hectares of food production. And I mean, what I've seen with a polyculture organic system, a hectare of organically grown food can yield about R250,000 per annum of valuable products. That's using last year's figures. And if we consider the inflation of costs of food, that's going to escalate. Compared to the returns from a piece of open grassland on a golf course, I doubt whether the subscriptions are going to match that kind of income generation or necessity generation. Whereas the subscriptions are really just pandering to a very elite selection of the population and not benefiting the population as a whole. And it gets compounded further by the kind of addiction to chemicals that takes place in that kind of environment, of massive applications of fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, and so forth, to maintain that situation. So really, a situation like that is one of, from an ecological perspective, the greatest disasters we're facing. And with very simple planning, if those resources were recycled into a food production system, we would have a great deal more satisfactory situation in terms of nutrition for the population in that area. No, I haven't.
What do you wish for this country?
That it's flourishing. Definitely. That the country flourishes to its potential. I mean, actually, this country has incredible potential. It really does. And that includes the human resources, as well as all our natural resources. It's well blessed with natural resources. It's a splendid place. And it really should be flourishing.
Should governments ban or promote that would work? That would help us get ourselves out of the
communities. You have to empower communities to take hold of their own destiny instead of becoming dependents. That's very important, and there's a holistic, it's definitely a holistic approach would be needed. We should thrive on our diversity instead of nitpicking in our diversity. And I'm talking here of populations. Populations should be allowed to nurture themselves instead of forming into lagers that are feeling constantly threatened. I think a rethink on urbanization is desperately needed, personally. It's not a mode that has worked anywhere satisfactorily throughout our cultural history. Most metropolitan cultures have ended up extinct, and we should really learn from that. It seems that we failed to learn from it. I don't think there's an exception to that. We kind of think that New York is beautiful and wonderful and it's going to last forever. But there's no ways a metropolitan area that large, and we could speak of more local urban centers, can sustain themselves. They are entirely dependent on importing their requirements. And with the kind of culture of plundering our resources instead of respecting and nurturing our resources, they're going to run out. Resources are going to run out, and urban centers are going to face even more extreme crises than they're going to face at the moment. And that we should see that. And we should take steps to develop a society where, if you like, the load is spread, and we have many more smaller, more balanced communities.
Population control?
Autonomous. Versus globalization.
Funny enough, I think there's something very anti-life about population control. That's my own personal opinion.
It's because you've got 5 kids.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it is, but I think there's something anti-life about it. It's true that the escalation of the human population is alarming, but is it alarming because of the concentrations of people in urban centers, or is it alarming simply because of the increase in numbers? Is it alarming because of the plundering of the planet? Okay, that increased population would, in a sense, people think implicitly imply. Or is it actually the industrial mode that is the danger? And personally, I would tend to think it's our industrial mode that is the problem.
So you think it's actually possible for us to continue to have continually and forever escalating population movement?
No, it can't happen.
Then at what point would you say this anti-life thing would kick in?
Nature's going to kick in anyway, whether we like it or not. There will be natural controls coming in. They might be shocking. Maybe they are kicking in with the massive health problems that are occurring in the first world. It's nature's way of kicking back and trying to balance things out. So you could almost say is that high concentration of people is asking for pathology of some sort or another. Some disease, some crisis is inevitable.
Globalization?
Yeah, I think it's an insidious arrangement.
It's terrible.
I do. Because it's
Would you
tied.
would you ban monoculture?
Look, it's on terminology. Generally, look, a golf course is a monoculture. No, I don't think it's healthy. It's elitism applied to plants. So society's elitism is transferred and manifested in its mode of agriculture. It's a kind of elitism, very much so, on many levels: economic, social, product. Eliminate competitors. I mean, what's shocking is the loss of diversity. We should cherish diversity and not eliminate it.
Diversity is smursty, who cares? What would you say to that?
I laugh at the ignorance of the comment. Or I smile. There's a rather sinister element to it, but really shame on the person who is seen the world like that.
I spoke to an environmentalist who told me, oh no, we've already accepted that there's going to be a half the species, but that's okay. Do you think that that is just them being practical, or do you think it's them given basically, shouldn't they call themselves environmentalists?
I think they're speaking from a comfortable perspective and have never really faced life-threatening situations. Because if they had faced life-threatening situations, they wouldn't make a remark like that. So that is a very comfortable elitist position. Yeah, there's a smugness to it that's actually tragically unrealistic. That person is extremely naive about how harsh life can be for most of the population.
Do you think we're better off now than we were 50 years plus ago?
No, not really, no. I might even say that we're worse off. I don't think technology has really contributed as much as it makes out that it has contributed. If you consider in the last 50 years the loss of habitat and natural resources, the massive utilization of finite fuel, no. We're still engaged in warfare. No. If anything, I think the desertification of the planet is far more alarming in the last 50 years than it has ever been. And I don't mean desertification, I mean it in every single respect. Creativity, I think, has diminished. So there's been a kind of desertification of creativity. We have mass-produced creativity. And so the initiative of individuals to be creative has been lost. And that, I think, is one of the most tragic things. And then there's desertification, quite literally, of our environment, where environment has become totally degraded. And that has escalated in the last 50 years. I don't think health problems have been solved by technology, as they're allegedly done. I don't think wealth is a very good indicator, because we seem to have almost more poverty than we had 50 years ago. And people might have lived mighty simple lives, but the sense of impoverishment was not there. That has escalated. So even though people lived a lot of very simple, humble lives, they were a great deal more content, healthier, and more creative.
What do you teach your children about, what do you wish for your children to do about the future, if anything? Do you think it's not their problem, or do you hope that they somehow can undo what's been done?
I hope they have the initiative and creativity to deal with the challenges that are undoubtedly going to be presented to them. I think, in a sense, as a guidance with my children, we have had adventures. We've tried to teach the children to deal with challenges. And I think that's very important. So, for example, the challenges of a new country, a new language, being able to adapt. So I think that's the most important thing, is to be lively enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And one can only hope that they survive and flourish.
Why is the Ganges almost over? Because the glacier is melting 1,000 times faster than it was predicted to melt. to melt. So it's already gone in by about 5 kilometers. Now, it's happened now. In today's news, you have seen that the Alps have got no snow this year. As the Alps get no snow, Europe gets no water. So it's already upon us. So when we use language like, oh, in 2050 it's happened, nobody for a minute believes A, that they will die, but 2, that they will ever see 2050, strangely enough. Both these beliefs exist in our minds. So if we could say, we are already in the middle of the climate change, we're done, we're finished. It's not only the polar bears who are hanging about in little islands, we are hanging about little islands. If I get 7 million Bangladeshi refugees per year, because Bangladesh is going down, because it's a coastal area, then my life is already over. How can euro can fail today, the rupee tomorrow. How can I stop revolution in my country? How can I stop anything from happening if I'm absolutely inundated with refugees? So what are we talking about? The quality of life is already over. Now it's just life we're looking at. So if we would change our language and realize that we are where we are, right in the middle of it, then perhaps people might work with more urgency. Secondly, if we stop data collection for a little bit and just get on to action. 3, if we stop COP17, COP20, COP92 and just do it as countries, realizing that we are in the middle of a crisis and each country has to deal with it, whether legislation or force or persuasion or what, and call a moratorium, for God's sake, on population building. Instead of giving incentives to having a 5th child, as so many countries still do, and just say, okay, for the next 5 years, we will all not have children, and let's see what we can do with our resources then. We'll have to do something. The point is nobody's doing anything, because we all think it's still in the future. The day New Orleans died should have been a wake-up for everybody. The fact that Japan has let radioactive water swish about, and all of us are covering it up, instead of noticing the huge amounts of fish that are washing up. If we notice the 400 black holes in the ocean caused by just urea, and the US and India being the highest urea users in the world, even that we haven't stopped. Now, in all our economies, methane is playing a biofuel part. There's an intention of every country to increase methane, not decrease it, so that it takes the place of carbon dioxide. Hello? Does that make any sense at all? India has a proper economic plan to increase methane use. So, again, another long answer. Sorry.
Thank you.
And there just doesn't seem to be any short answers here. I wish I could just reply with yes.
Maybe I'll think of something. The World Preservation Foundation has seen a number of solutions that can actually work, and one of them is the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency have said that the quickest way and the cheapest way to pull down carbon dioxide, to stop the heating, is to plant trees, to grow trees rather, and grass, to take the livestock off all the rangelands, all the pastures of the world. And that would cost only 20% of any other mitigation proposal. Now,
where do you take this cattle off?
2 years ago, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency produced it. I'm happy to be happy to get it.
It's all right.
In Africa, 51% of the continent is actually high rainfall savanna. That is, there's more than 3/4 of a metre rainfall. And we're told that with that rainfall, if the savanna was not burned, it would return to woodland and forest. So there we have huge potential to soak up. It's in Africa, fire is used commonly to maintain pastures, to burn out old grasses. Several times a year they fire.
No, it's used in India as well. It's used in China. It's used all over the world.
Yeah.
Fire is used as a method to clean up.
Yeah. So I share your concern, but I do see these solutions are there, are readily available for us.
I don't see any
solutions. Do you think we should?
I don't see tree planting as a solution that will work tree is not a tomato plant. It doesn't grow in 2 months. I can plant a billion, million, trillion trees, and I will still have to wait 50 years for them to turn into a forest. Right? A tree, 100 trees does not a forest make.
No. But there are many areas that will regrow naturally.
No, I'm saying even if we let it regrow naturally, or even whether we plant them, it's still not a solution that will work for me right now. It will not stop the Arctic from melting. I'm more concerned with the permafrost and the Arctic than I am with anything else. Because if they melt and we've still got the ozone holes there, then nothing stops us from completely going over the edge. So give me a solution that will stop the Arctic from melting, that will keep the permafrost, keep its methane. Give me that solution. Don't give me about putting 5 cattle into a room and letting the grass grow naturally. We're looking at titch-button solutions. That's why NGOs do, halfpenny worth of work and then congratulate themselves horribly. Or governments use NGO work to say how well they're doing. But tell me the one solution that will stop the Arctic. That's all. That's the one point we need to go to. Not Durban, not India, not anywhere else.
So, Madam Gandhi, I have a question from the moderator. In the mitigation strategy...
1 second.
Sorry.
Yeah, tell me.
No, just to follow on this question, you mentioned mitigation strategy from grassland. I'm just wondering if you could share with us your opinion of the difference of changing diet versus a mitigation strategy like that.
If you don't eat, you don't have to take... You see, the Netherlands is suggesting every country has come up with its own crackpot solution, all right, to remove 12% and 15%. US says make pigs with 3 stomachs and cows that have produced less fermentation, right? All the scientific establishment is now working on biogenetics for animals to make them produce less methane. Netherlands, as you say, is saying let's take them all off the pastures and put them into rooms. The point is, whether you put them into rooms or you put them outside, they're going to produce the same methane levels. Yeah? So the best is not to have them at all. And the only way you could not have them is by not eating them. So don't eat them. And by next year they won't be there. And then you can have all the pastures you want. You can have all the regeneration you want. All the fires that are set in our countries are to clean up the areas for cattle. So they won't be set anymore.
So do you think the vegan solution is a real solution?
I'm saying not only is it a real solution, but it's an immediate solution. Within 3 years, you will have given us a breather to work out the carbon dioxide problem. Here we're not even getting the breather.
Yes, South Africa Broadcasting.
There's a lot of even sort of... my name's Judy Searle. I'm on assignment for 50/50 SABC TV2. There's a lot of people who in the main plenary discussions, the fact that methane is not on the table is really ridiculous. But even what is on the table, the fact that there is so much contesting of everything that is trying to prevent us from using a fossil fuel-based society, it doesn't make sense. Have you? There's a lot of people who've, as a result, come to think of it as like a conspiracy, that there's actually, the government's actually working for the oil companies and we just fools who just go along with it. We believe we have democracy because we get a vote once every 5 years. Is there any other reason that you can think of why the world would actually choose to actually, I mean, those people who are in there discussing nothing except money, surely they either don't believe it or there's some other agenda. Have you got any idea what it could be? And the second question is the sea. I'm really very worried about our situation in the sea. Can you just tell me what you would have told us if you'd had more time last night about the sea?
Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that why are people quarreling inside COP? Because not a single one knows what they're saying. They're all career diplomats, career bureaucrats and career politicians, none of whom are scientists and none of whom have actually got any positions except country positions, which are that I will take home more than the other. If you look at the COP from 1 to 17, the same person hasn't attended the next COP, either the same minister nor the same bureaucrat. Most of them, like for instance in India, the person who's coming here was appointed last week. So hasn't got a position at all, except I won't do what my predecessor did. So what you're dealing with is people who are talking about matters they knew nothing about, to an audience which is not in Durban but in their own countries. And it's about a subject that cannot be dealt with, as I said before. Why would I quarrel with you? And why would I keep quarreling with you? Unless I didn't know what I was talking about. 2, I didn't know what I wanted. What do we want with carbon dioxide? As I said, what is the position? What are we quarreling about? Not one person at COP17 is saying, all right, I will do this, let's quarrel about this. Shall we put off coal first or cars first? That hasn't even come to the table. The quarrel is, you have more carbon dioxide than I have, therefore you must allow me to have as much carbon dioxide as you have before I mitigate it. That is the quarrel, right, to put it simply. Now that has half the world on one side and half the world on the other. Now that is not a bridge you can divide, because the developed world is saying, okay, we've made the mistakes, please don't make them again. We will pay you money not to do it. And the developing world is saying, I know, I'm sorry, that's too late, I can't go back with just this much money. If you give me this much money, I'll think about it. But in actual fact, I'm not going to change because I'm going to do what you did. That's the only quarrel. So the actual nitty-gritty in COP17 or COP1, COP8, COP10, Rio, wherever you, Kyoto, Copenhagen, has not even come onto the table for negotiating. Which is, alright, am I putting a moratorium? You will be allowed to have 500,000 cars and I will be allowed to have 500,000 cars. Fine. Now let's talk about this. But that hasn't even come onto the table. Okay, you will be allowed to have 400 coal-based plants and I will be allowed to have 400 coal-based plants. Once you get to actuals, then there will be no more quarreling, then we're dealing. And we will be able to reach a sensible solution. But we haven't even reached the point of dealing. Because there's nothing to deal with. What we're actually doing is saying, I'm going to do what you're going to do, and you're saying, no, you're not going to do what I'm going to do. And I'll pay you not to do it, but my money is very little because my euro is going down the drain and I've got a recession going on in the US, so I'm going to give you very little. End of problem. So that is the problem. That is the reason why COP is achieving nothing. The second is about the sea, the ocean. You mean the ocean?
Yeah.
The ocean, unless you stop fishing, is dead. Unless you stop using it as the largest garbage dump on the earth, it's dead. Unless you start saying that using it as a resource, as a permanent oxygen sink, rather than a fish catching country, you're finished. After all, if I use urea, it all pours into the ocean. But I'm not the only one. You're pouring cyanide into the ocean, you're pouring your oil into the ocean, you're pouring everything into the ocean as we speak, every minute of the day. So it's not holding up at all. 400 black holes, each black hole is between 100 kilometers to 200 kilometers, which means we're looking at, what is a black hole? It's a hole that goes from the ocean floor to the top. And within it, there is no oxygen, there's not even this much signs of life. It is like a dead star. No fish will go through it, nobody can enter it. If you go in, you may not come out. And it has only been created by an excess of algae, which were created by the chemicals we put in. And they destroyed the ocean, that part of it, till no fish, nothing exists in it. Now these are not reparable. They will be there forever. And you had 16 6 years ago. You have 400 now. So how long is it going to be if the whole of the ocean is a black hole? Where will our water come from? After your clouds pick up water from the ocean and give it to us as fresh water? Where will we get water from if it's all a black hole? So the ocean is not something that we can even save. After all, your corals are almost all white now. And they are the biggest bioindicators. You have to stop fishing. You have to stop using it as a garbage dump. It's easily done. If you just stop fishing, you stop fishing. After when they said you can't kill whales, then everybody stopped killing whales, except Japan and Norway. So there are things that have to be done by executive order. But they're not even on the table as yet. Nobody is saying stop fishing. They're looking at quotas. You fished out the Arctic, so you go to the Pacific. You fished out the Pacific, now you go to the Indian Ocean. So I don't really have much hope. But in any case, all of it becomes irrelevant when the Arctic ice melts. So, I know, so boring, so despondent. I wish I could say something so happy that we would all be jumping about for joy.
Other follow-on questions? Yes.
Hello.
Please identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Mafeno from the University of South Africa. Okay. Just listening to all these men, of course, there's a sense of despondence and almost loss of hope. And I'm hoping that we might be able to come out of this. But surely, I doubt if it will be an overnight sort of solution as you are proposing. My question is twofold. Firstly, everything I think in the world is tied to economics, commercialization of this, that, or that, which is the money element. And that is why we have these big conglomerates, all of them defending their positions and doing what they're doing. I mean, there is money involved in commercialization. Now, from the message that is coming from your side, it's more, I would imagine, of an appeal to an individual, your ordinary man in the street, to say, change your lifestyle, basically, something that I'm very much for. But it's a case of how realistic is that? Because it's one thing to say, hey, let's look that way. For me, it's a case of how do we, if we were to just put simple, realistic steps for an ordinary person.
What I'm saying is, don't change your lifestyle. That's the thing that everybody doesn't understand. The carbon dioxide quarrelers, the ones that have taken carbon dioxide as their main message, are saying change your lifestyle, which is what nobody's prepared to do, including me. If you tell me don't go for a holiday, roam around in the dark, go to sleep before 6 because there's no electricity after 6, I'm not going to do it, right? I mean, Greece was dying and it still wouldn't change its lifestyle, right? So I'm saying, have as many cars as you want, put all the electricity on, do what you want, don't change your lifestyle, except in one small fashion. Don't eat meat.
That's what I'm saying.
Don't eat fish. Now that is the least of your lifestyle changes. If I asked you a simple question, give me a choice, whether you will use your car or whether you will eat meat. If you eat meat, you will not get a car, and you will not get buses, you will not get transport. Which one would you choose?
Well, look, it sounds all simplistic the way you...
No, it's quite simple. It's quite simple because one says, I'm saying use as much carbon dioxide as you want. Give up the methane. Now you have to take a choice. Obviously, anybody will say, no, a car represents for me freedom. Travel represents for me liberty. Whereas meat is irrelevant if I have great vegetables, if I have great food to eat, if I have mock meat, if I have things that taste the same as meat. After all, it's taste that you're worried about, right? And what we're saying is that without the methane content, we can give you the same meat, because that is where technology has already reached. So what would you rather give up?
See, what I'm trying to say, ma'am, is that I'm talking as a man in the street, somebody that lives in an ordinary community where, for whatever reason, over the last, I don't know how many years now, people's diet is so much made of, stuff from meat. Essentially,
Absolutely.
Now, that is a radical change to say to somebody, I mean, as you know, South Africa is one of the...
But I need to present it, governments need to present it as an either-or solution. If you do meat and cars, you die. So now you do meat or cars, meat or electricity, and you live well. Which one would you choose? Tell me.
Well, I know what you need to, but I'm saying, practically speaking, for an ordinary
So
guy,
then we be practical
for an
and we
ordinary
don't
guy,
die.
wherever he works, there's a KFC, there's a McDonald's there, there's this, that.
But that's there because you eat it.
So if we were to say to them, guys, this is what we should be doing, a step-by-step process
There's no step-by-step time now.
of living or living off.
I'm saying we are trying to do a step-by-step. We are saying, after all, I'm not standing here with a stick and making you, we are presenting to you delicious alternatives. We are presenting to you, after all, we are all as well dressed. We live just as well. There are no aging hippies here. We are all reasonably good in our professions. All we're saying is we do not believe in destroying the earth. And we believe that if you remove methane you can do well. That's all we're asking you to do, is to bring it onto the table. And this step-by-step approach has been tried for carbon dioxide. It hasn't worked for even one step. After all, after spending something like $100 trillion, solar energy is still 3% of the world's total electricity mix. So that's step-by-step. That's a step-by-step approach. So no doubt by the time we all die, it will reach 5%. So what we're saying is governments now have to take a decision and say that no meat now. Why don't governments say no drugs, no cocaine? Some governments will at some point say no smoking, hopefully. So why don't they just say no meat? Or not no meat, I'm saying, no meat export. You want to eat meat, produce it yourself. You'll find half of the world can't produce it.
Yeah, briefly, just to follow up on what, my name is Melanie St. James. I'm here from Empowerment Works. We're based in California. We're a global sustainability think tank in action. And the first thing I'm hearing is that there's a lack of evidence-based policy making. And so, Madam Gandhi, from your experience, long experience in government in India, what do you feel would enable, what mechanisms could on a national level, like you said, so we can take action, each country do what they can. What have you seen to be effective? And also in regards to what is culturally relevant and normal, just wanted to call attention to Dr. Mienge's presentation yesterday about the proteins that have been traditionally in the African diet, and actually that the meat consumption is more of a neo-colonial consumer-based strategy and marketing from globalization, and the evidence of that historically, and how that has really become more of a market trend rather than our own culture here, or the culture here.
So the question is, what should governments do? Is that the question?
How can evidence become part of the policy-making framework?
The first thing is to, I'll tell you a story. I don't know whether it should be on television, but it's a correct story. When I was 32, I was Minister for Environment, and I was sent off to fight, to work the Montreal Protocol, because India was holding up the entire agreement. So before I left, I asked the Prime Minister, what should I say? And he said, I don't care, say anything. And so I actually studied, and we managed to get the protocol through. But that were my specific directions. I don't care, do what you like. So the first thing is perhaps to bring these up in all parliaments. Let people bring up methane for debate. Let everybody realize the seriousness of the situation. And then let governments sit together and work at it in their own way. If some people want to do coal first, let them do coal.